Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time we're tackling a topic I know a lot of you are thinking about, especially with all the news about AI lately, and that's the future of work.
It's a big one.
It really is. And to help us unpack it all, we're going to be diving into Robots Will Steal Your Job, But It's Okay by Federico Pistono.
Great book.
Yeah, it really resonated with me. We've looked at a lot of books and articles on this topic, but something about Pistono's perspective really stood out.
Yeah, he's got a really interesting background. He was actually born in 1981, right as the personal computer was taking off. So he didn't grow up with this fear of technology taking over. He grew up with it as just a normal part of life.
Exactly. And that kind of shapes his whole outlook. He's not afraid to explore the potential downsides of automation, but he's also really optimistic about the possibilities it opens up. But before we get too deep into that, he starts with a concept that I think is crucial for understanding this whole conversation: the rule of 70.
Right, because if we're going to talk about the future, we need a way to wrap our heads around just how fast things are changing, and the rule of 70 helps with that.
So for those who aren't familiar with it, what is the rule of 70 and what does it have to do with, of all things, a chessboard?
Okay, so picture this. You've invented the game of chess, and you're presenting it to the king. The king's so impressed that he offers you any reward you desire.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So you, being clever, ask for 1 grain of wheat on the first square of the chessboard, 2 on the second, 4 on the third, and so on, doubling with each square.
Sounds simple enough, right?
That's what the king thinks. He assumes it'll be a handful of wheat at most. But as they start filling the chessboard, something fascinating happens.
What? What happens?
Well, the amounts seem tiny at first, but because they're doubling with each square, they start to get really big, really fast.
Okay, so where does this rule of 70 come in?
It's a way to quickly estimate how long it takes for something to double when it's growing exponentially. You just divide 70 by the growth rate. So if something's growing at 10% per year, it'll double in about 7 years.
Okay, I see. And with the chessboard, the growth rate is 100% because it's doubling with every square. So it's like that doubling is happening crazy fast.
Exactly. By the time you get to the second half of the chessboard, you're talking about millions, then billions, then trillions of grains of wheat. Way more wheat than has ever existed.
Wow. I mean, that's just mind-boggling.
Hmm.
So how does this relate to robots and jobs?
Because computing power, which is what drives all this AI and automation, is on a similar trajectory. It's not just increasing, it's doubling in power every year or two in some cases.
Wow. So it's not just that technology is changing, it's that the rate of change is accelerating. And that's what people often miss.
They sure do. They think it's like a car driving down a straight road at a steady speed, but it's more like a rocket taking off.
That's a great analogy, and I think that's what makes Pistono's book so important. He's not just telling us what's going to change, he's helping us understand the speed and scale of that change.
Absolutely. And once you grasp that, it changes your whole perspective on things.
So computing power is growing exponentially.
Mhm.
Got it. But what does that actually mean for the future of work? Are robots really about to take over everything?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because when we say robots taking our jobs, we often picture these like physical robots, replacing people in factories or driving trucks.
Right, like in the movies.
Exactly. But the thing is, software, AI, it's already transforming industries in ways we don't even realize. And that's happening right now.
And that actually reminds me, Pistono's original title for the book was even longer and more to the point, maybe. He wanted to call it Machine Intelligence and Computer Algorithms Are Already Stealing Your Job and Will Increasingly Do So in the Future.
Get you right.
Well, it gets the message across, but it highlights something you touched on. This isn't just about robots in the future. It's about AI right now.
Exactly. AI is already here, and it's doing things that not that long ago we thought only humans could do.
So how does AI actually work in these scenarios? Because computers aren't thinking the same way we are they?
You're right, they don't. They don't have emotions or get creative in the same way. But what they're really good at is processing tons and tons of data, like way more than we can even imagine.
And finding patterns in all that data.
Yes, patterns we might totally miss. And once they find those patterns, they can use them to make predictions.
Is that how those personalized recommendations work? Like when you're shopping online and it's suggesting things you might like. Is that AI?
It is. Think about it. Those suggestions aren't just random. There are algorithms looking at your browsing history, what you've bought before, even how long you spend on certain pages, and then they compare that to what millions of other people are doing.
So it's not really that the computer knows what I like. It's more like It's recognizing a pattern in my behavior and saying, hey, other people who acted like this ended up buying that, so maybe you will too.
Exactly. And the more data these algorithms have, the better they get at making those predictions.
So it's like those recommendations are going to keep getting more and more accurate, even a little creepy, maybe. But Pistono also talks about AI being used in journalism. And that's where I was like, hold on, robots are writing articles now.
It's happening. There was this experiment where they had a machine learning algorithm write short recaps of baseball games. They wanted to see how it would compare to something written by, a human sports writer.
Well, I do.
Well, the AI articles, they were surprisingly good, like really similar to what a human would write, even using sports jargon and stuff.
Wow, that's both impressive and a little scary at the same
Hmm.
time. If computers can write sports articles, what's going to happen to journalists?
It's a good question, and it's not just journalists. We're seeing AI being used more and more in creative fields like marketing, even art and music.
So it's not that human creativity is going away, but our roles are changing as AI takes on new tasks.
Exactly. And this leads to another important point. It's not just that AI is smarter than us in some ways, it's how quickly it can learn and adapt. Pisano talks about IBM's Watson as an example. The computer that won on Jeopardy!
Yeah, I remember that. But wasn't that just a one-time thing, a game show?
That's what's so interesting. Watson has moved on to bigger and better things. They're using it in healthcare now.
Really? How does that work?
Well, Watson can analyze medical data, research papers, patient records, all that stuff. And it can do it way faster and more thoroughly than any human could.
So it's like having a super-powered medical assistant.
Kinda, yeah. It can help doctors diagnose diseases, recommend treatments, even spot potential drug interactions that might have been missed.
That's incredible. But I imagine that kind of technology is super expensive.
It was to develop, for sure. But here's where that exponential growth curve comes in again. The cost of this kind of technology drops really fast as it advances.
So as AI gets more powerful, it also gets more affordable.
Exactly. And as that happens, it's going to change the way we work in fields like healthcare and so many others.
Doctors will be working alongside AI. Teachers might be using AI in the classroom.
It's not about AI replacing people entirely. It's about this partnership, this collaboration between humans and AI.
That makes sense. So we've talked about AI in these like white-collar jobs, writing, medicine. But what about those jobs that require, physical skills, like driving? Pistono talks about that too, right? Yeah, he uses self-driving cars, which is something a lot of people are talking about. But he doesn't just talk about the technology. He tells this like cautionary tale about it.
It's a really clever way to make a point.
Right.
He describes this future where Google's self-driving cars, they finally hit the roads. And at first, everything's amazing. Like, it works perfectly, accidents go way down, people love it.
Sounds great. Where's the cautionary part?
Well, here's the thing. There's this one fatal accident.
Oh, okay. And that's when things go south.
Totally. What's interesting is Pistono doesn't even say if it was the car's fault or not. It could have been a human driver that caused it, or some weird mechanical failure. But the point is, that doesn't even seem to matter.
People freak out anyway.
Yeah. Public opinion, it just flips. The media goes crazy. People get scared. Suddenly, nobody trusts these cars anymore.
Even if the data shows that they're statistically safer than human drivers.
Exactly. Pistono talks about protests, lawsuits, states even trying to ban self-driving cars altogether.
It becomes this emotional thing, not just about the technology.
Exactly. And it's not just about cars either. It's about any technology that makes us uncomfortable, that we don't fully understand. We tend to react with fear, even if the data says we shouldn't.
Which is kind of ironic, right? Because we're talking about AI being driven by data, but then our human reaction to it is often completely emotional.
Totally. And that's Pistono's point. We can't just focus on building amazing technology. We have to think about the human side of it, the social and economic implications.
Because if we don't, we end up with this backlash, like with the self-driving cars. So where does that leave us? If automation is coming, what happens to all of us? Our jobs, our sense of purpose?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's where things get really interesting. Because Pistono, he challenges this idea that our work defines us, that our job is the only source of purpose in life.
Which, let's be honest, is kind of a relief to hear, right? Because not everyone finds their dream job, and even if they do, there's got to be more to life than that.
Exactly. And he gives these examples of people finding meaning and purpose outside of traditional work. Like, he talks about this factory worker who felt morally conflicted because his job was making weapons. And then there's this guy he met who spoke like 5 languages fluently, but he couldn't get a job because he didn't have a fancy degree.
So it's not always a perfect system. And it makes you realize not everyone's going to find fulfillment in the same way.
Exactly. And then Pistono dives into all this research about happiness, which is fascinating. Like, we all think more money equals more happiness, right?
Makes sense, right?
But the research shows it's not that simple. Money helps up to a point for sure. Like, if you can't pay your rent, that's stressful. But once your basic needs are met, getting more and more money doesn't actually make you that much happier.
It's like that saying, money can't buy you happiness.
Exactly. And he talks about this other interesting thing called the paradox of choice. We think having more choices is always better, but actually, it can make us less happy.
Really? Why is that?
Because too many choices, it's overwhelming. It makes us second guess ourselves. Are we making the right decision? We end up feeling paralyzed instead of empowered.
I totally get that. Sometimes I just want someone to tell me what to order. Okay, so if more money and more choices aren't the keys to happiness, what is? What's the secret?
That's where Pistono gets really inspiring, because he doesn't just leave us with these anxieties about robots taking our jobs and us being unhappy. He actually gives us practical advice for how to thrive in this new world.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
Well, he talks a lot about the power of owning less stuff, decluttering our lives, focusing on experiences instead of possessions. He even talks about growing your own food. He calls it a subversive plot.
I love that. A subversive plot to grow your own tomatoes. Sign me up.
Right. And for people who love to learn, he talks about all these amazing online resources like Khan Academy. He actually shares his own experience of being kind of bored in school, but then finding this love of learning later on in his own way.
I think that resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah.
We don't all learn the same way, and we don't all have to.
Exactly. And Pistono also talks about how we can be more self-sufficient, like with home energy. There are all these things we can do that are good for the planet and actually save us money in the long run. He's got this whole vision of a future where people are collaborating more, sharing knowledge, using technology to create a better world.
It's a really optimistic view of the future.
Okay.
So if you had to sum up Pistono's main message in a nutshell, what would it be?
I think it's that the future is uncertain, absolutely. But we don't have to be afraid of that uncertainty. Remember that chessboard. We actually have a lot of control over what that future looks like. It's up to us to shape it.
And to decide what really matters to us. What do we want our lives to be about? It's not just about the jobs. It's about finding meaning and purpose in whatever we do.
Exactly. And Pistono, he leaves us with this great question. What is the purpose of life if work becomes optional? It's a question we should all be thinking about.
It's a question that makes you really examine your values. What's important? Creativity, connection, helping others. Maybe it's a little bit of everything. But that's the exciting part. We get to figure it out.
We do. And if this deep dive has got you curious, I definitely recommend checking out Pistono's book. It's full of even more thought-provoking ideas.
It's a great read. And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. Keep thinking about these ideas, talk to your friends, see where they lead you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.